I'm Lucas Alexanders for Age of Truth TV. We are in Copenhagen, Denmark to do an interview with professor and scientist Dr. Niels Harrit, who was born in Copenhagen in 1945. In 2006, Professor Harrit's life took a new unexpected turn as he was introduced to the mysterious collapse of a third building happening on September the 11th, 2001, known as Building 7. Age of Truth TV met Dr. Niels Harrit at the University of Copenhagen on the 20th of February 2013 to talk about 9/11 and his now very different worldview. Age of Truth. Thank you very much, Professor Harrit, for meeting up with Age of Truth TV. It's wonderful to see you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and I'm looking very much forward to this conversation with you.
You're welcome.
First of all, I would like to ask you, how did you go from being a respected chemical professor to suddenly take a very controversial stand against the official story of what happened on 9/11/2001? And why is it still so important to talk about an event that happened 12 years ago?
The first one is very personal, and it happened that I saw the third building on World Trade Center collapsing accidentally on a video in 2006. As you are aware of probably, but maybe some of the viewers aren't, that there were 3 skyscrapers collapsing on September 11th on Manhattan, but there were 2 airliners. And when you see the third skyscraper, which usually is called Building 7, because there were 7 buildings in the World Trade Center. When you see that collapse as a scientist, you have the immediate problem that there's no obvious reason for this thing to happen. You see a skyscraper, 186 meters, 47 stories. This is about 3 times taller than any building we have here in Copenhagen. And you see it just going down, presumably, apparently for no reason. You have a problem as a scientist, because I'm trained, as has been so for 50 years, to understand what is going on around me from a natural scientific point of view, and usually it goes very well. I do understand what is going on around me, but on this occasion there was no apparent reason at all for this building to collapse. That was problem number 1. And the second problem I had relates to the other half of your question, actually, because the fact that I had never seen this event before triggered immediate suspicion. Actually, I got very annoyed, because apparently the people who decides what we are supposed to know had decided that we should not know about the third skyscraper collapsing on September 11th.
And who are you talking about now?
Those who are running basically the mainstream media. And that annoyed me quite a lot and triggered many thoughts. It took me about a couple of weeks actually to realize that what I had seen is the most important event of our generation. And I mean that. This is more important, as you go into it, it's more important than the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Really?
Yeah. It's the most important event since Second World War II ended.
So is that the reason why you think it's still very important to talk about it 12 years after?
It is. I would even go as far as saying that the Third World War started 11 years ago. But it's a gradual we are sliding into it.
Just to sum up a few things, actually, what happened on 9/11, 2001. At 8:46 a.m., World Trade Center 1, the North Tower, was hit by a plane. At 9:03 a.m., World Trade Center 2, the South Tower, was hit by a plane. At 9:59 a.m., World Trade Center 2, the South Tower, collapses. At 10:28 a.m., World Trade Center 1, the North Tower, collapses.
That's right.
But then at 5:21 p.m. in the afternoon, World Trade Center Building 7 collapses. Why do you think that the mainstream media has not reported very much on that collapse? Why has that been kept from public knowledge?
Because it's quite obvious is a controlled demolition. This is what we are talking about here are buildings called steel frame high-rises. And they simply do not collapse. And here I'm referring to experience. Natural science is based on experience. And the official narrative is that World Trade Center 7 collapsed due to ordinary office fires. And since there has been many fires in steel frame high-rises over the time, but in no case they have collapsed due to fire.
It's never happened before?
Nope, or after. And according to the official narrative of the day, it happened 3 times on that day, and it's never happened before or after. And already there, the case is settled, basically.
But how did the fire start in Building 7? Because there was no plane that hit the building.
We don't know. This we don't know.
Was it debris from the 2 other towers that could have caused it?
This is what they claim in the official technical report from the National Institute of Science. That the debris falling from the North Tower ignited fires in Building 7. But according to their own account, there were no fires in the building between 1 and 2 in the afternoon. And why the fire started again at 2 o'clock, we don't know. But it really makes no difference. And no matter how much fires there have been, steel frame high-rises simply do not collapse due to fire. There's been
and that is a scientific proof that a steel frame high-rise does not collapse because of a fire.
To the extent that science is based on experience, and we do experiments, you can consider, maybe cynically, that each fire in a skyscraper to be an experiment, and afterwards you make the observation that, well, the building remains standing. And when you have repeated this experiment a sufficient number of times, you believe that steel frame high-rises do not collapse due to fires. But on top of that, there has been controlled experiments with steel frames. And fires. And I'm talking about full-scale buildings, 8 stories high. This was performed by British Steel, was the name. They're not called British Steel anymore. But between 1993 and 2001, they performed a total of 7 controlled fires. In this full-scale building, they had constructed on the Carrington test site in the south of England. And when I'm saying control, meant that they could actually follow the temperatures within the steel structure with thermocouples. And in the worst case scenario, they measured temperatures within the steel of 1100 degrees centigrade, which is ridiculous because at that time steel has lost all of its power, all of its structural strength. It's like boiled spaghetti, basically. But the building as such remained standing. So the experiments have been done, and the conclusion has been drawn, and that is a steel frame high-rise does not collapse due to fire. And still, this is what is claimed according to the official story.
So you say it's a controlled demolition. But how significant was World Trade Center Building 7, and what departments were working inside of the building?
Yeah, there are so many parallel stories in this. And in Building 7, there were some commercial banks which are not really important except for Salomon Smith and Barney, which was a huge what do you call it, a broker company, broker firm. And they had occupied the upper, I think, 20 floors of the building. So in some connections, the building is called the Salomon Building. For instance, in BBC. But more importantly is that the CIA had their secret New York undercover headquarters in the building. This was revealed in New York Times a couple of days later. Pentagon, Defense Department, had offices in the building, and so had what you call it, the tax, the IRS had offices in the building. Secret Service had the biggest office outside of Washington, D.C., with 200 employees in the building. And some people find it very interesting that the Securities and Exchange Commission, they were occupying the 12th and the 13th floor. And this is a body, a federal institution which monitors all cases of fraud and corruption within corporate America. And at that time, they had between 3,000 and 4,000 cases in their files, ongoing cases. And much of this material was destroyed in this collapse we're talking about here. This by some people finds interesting.
That sounds indeed like a very significant and important building. Probably the most important building, obviously. But why do you think...
and maybe we should also mention that on the 23rd floor, there was it was a command center taking charge if New York City was hit by some kind of catastrophe. And this floor was not only had bulletproof windows, they had actually grenade, gun-proofed windows. They had their own power supply, their own water supply, their own air supply. And the New Yorkers find it odd that Rudy Giuliani has to establish this command center, because there was a quite equivalent command center under the main police station where such a thing should be. But this was established on the 23rd floor, and the role played by this command center is still speculative.
I have heard that the former science and technology minister from Germany, Andreas von Bülow, has said that he is certain that the 9/11 attacks were orchestrated from that command center inside of Building 7. And it's also said that that particular command center cost around $30 million. So he said, Andreas von Bülow, he said that the reason why they took it down must be to destroy the evidence that maybe the attacks were orchestrated from that building. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say that's just one example of the many speculations which are about Building 7. There's no basis actually for going any further with that, because we still need, there has never been a criminal investigation of this event, and we have to wait for that to get the final answers. But it's definitely odd, let's put it that way.
When you give your lectures, you talk a lot about nanothermite, and I know you've been teaching nano-science. But thermite is very interesting, and I don't think a lot of people know what thermite is. Maybe you should explain what nanothermite is.
I consider it still an academic footnote. I mean, all you have to do is watching Building 7 and the towers collapsing, and you don't need any scientific training for realizing that they are controlled demolitions for reasons I've already given. And there's no doubt that explosives were used in these demolitions.
Does anybody have proof that there were explosives inside of the building?
There's no way you can take down these buildings without using explosives. Building 7 is coming down at free fall speed. It means that the 47th floor, when it starts moving, is moving as if there's absolutely no support of this floor below it. It means that all columns has been taken out, and the last of these columns must be taken out at the exact same moment for the building to go down in free fall, completely symmetrically, and fall into its own footprint. This is a complete unambiguous conclusion. There is no way around this building can come down in free fall without the application of explosives.
So it could not have happened with the planes that hit the towers, which is the official story that the media and politicians and everybody has been giving the world.
We should be careful not to mix up things. The towers is a different story. I was talking about building 7.
Okay.
The towers did not come down at free fall speed. And they didn't, I would claim they didn't collapse. They were blown up from the top down. Just watch the videos. There is no top section driving its way through the pile.
So that was not because of the planes hitting the towers?
Absolutely. There's no relation, physically causal relation between the impact of the airliners and the collapse of the Twin Towers.
How come
Nothing to do with
How
it.
come there hasn't been more scientists like yourself and people who've been studying these things who've come out and said these things? Why doesn't people talk about it like you do?
Because academia has been gagged in the Western society. This is another consequence of 9/11.
That's a lot of people we're talking about.
That is a lot of people, but many people has been deceived. Basically, there are many reasons for this. And maybe I was jumping in my line of reasoning. The major reason is that even the university scientists, they get their information from the same sources as everybody else. And referring to the start of this interview we had, it means that nobody knows about these events. Everybody believes that the towers collapsed due to the airliners. And for my own part, up until 2006, I didn't think much about it. And I'm a university scientist, okay? So I didn't think much about it. It was the airliners.
So it's because of repetition in the media that even scientists doesn't even question this.
Yeah, this is the way the media are run. And so the scientists get their information from the same sources as everybody else. That's one thing. Another thing is that the way universities are what you say, can run has changed a lot. And between 1488, we were self-ruling in the sense that the leaders, the directors, the president were elected among the peers, and this was including the students and the technical staff. But in 2003, this was changed to a completely top-down governmental controlled system where basically the university now is run by the government.
So what you're saying is actually that the educational system is also kind of been bought a little bit.
I would say it's a very bad career move within the university.
And you've been teaching for 45 years, huh?
Yeah, but I'm retired now. Yeah. And but it's a very bad career move within the university system, even to mention 9/11 at the lunch table. All and right. This goes for the rest of society. And it reflects, actually, if you see, there are many scientists who speak out, but they do not get a voice in the mainstream media. No. But if you see it,
You've been getting a little bit in the mainstream media, haven't you? Both in Denmark and also in England and other places.
No.
Not enough, you say?
No, it's not true. At the contrary, I'm banned in the mainstream media. But and if we get through, it's always an accident. It's a young journalist who thinks he has a good story, but when he gets to the editor, he is being told that it is not a good story at all. And usually the interview is cancelled, or it is manipulated in such a way that it comes out. The National Danish Radio, I have not been, yes, I have been on a short TV clip for a few minutes, years back in the morning.
So it's the alternative media, such as this and others, that actually
it's the
that
internet.
gives you the voice that you have to.
But let me finish this line of reasoning, because what I wanted to point out is that all the scientists speaking out there all retired.
Right.
So they are over the hill, so to speak. Mm-hmm. You don't see a 40 years old scientist in a university position daring to come out with anything.
Or somebody just starting out, no.
Yeah.
Right.
Which means they won't start at all.
So getting back to the nanothermite, just to sum up how you're talking about it and how you think it was used in the buildings, both the Twin Towers and Building 7, just to explain to people what that is.
I stressed before that explosives were used. There's another thing called incendiaries, which are materials, energetic materials, who explosives work by means of force. An explosive is a chemical where you produce a gas very fast, meaning that you knock things over by means of pressure. But an incendiary is destroying things by means of heat. This is a chemical reaction which gets temperatures so outrageous that you can actually burn through everything. And the thermite mixture is such a chemical mixture composition. It has an old history. The principle of this chemical reaction goes back to 1893, actually. A German chemist called Hans Goldschmidt realized that if you mix pulverized aluminum with pulverized iron oxide, you may call it rust, if we should use the general term. These two powders, and you have them react, you will observe temperatures up to 2,500 degrees centigrade, and you produce elemental iron in the process. That is, you get molten iron out of this chemical reaction, more than 1,000 degrees hotter than the melting point of ordinary iron, and that it means steel. So this incendiary can be used for military purposes. You can
melt everything, steel, whatever, anything.
Yeah, armor.
Armor, yeah.
Basically. So it is used in torpedoes and grenades and cave busters and stuff like that.
So is it always or frequently used in controlled demolitions?
Nope, not. No, actually there has been no, to our knowledge, no other controlled demolitions where you have used thermite. But there are more than 10 independent observations in relation to the collapses of the 3 high-rises of World Trade Center, which each on their own implies the application of thermite. Products formed in the reaction, particles found in the dust. Now the nanothermite story is a little different because it cannot account for all the observations. And what we have found is a material which fits research, which we know has been ongoing in military laboratories since the early 1990s. But this is military research, so we don't know too much about it. But even these scientists have to write reports, and they're appearing at conferences. So we have conference proceedings. We have some idea, actually, we understand the chemical principles behind applying nanotechnology in constructing modern energetic materials. And the term energetic materials, it covers both explosives and what I say, incendiaries, and also rocket propellants, for instance, are based on the same principles these days. We call them composite materials, and meaning that they're different from, I would not say conventional explosives. The proper term is molecular explosives, like dynamite.
But could the nanothermite come from the planes that hit the buildings?
No way.
It's not possible.
No way.
So it had to be put in there. It had to be placed inside the buildings. Is that how it is?
Absolutely.
So how do you think that those supposed terrorists could have brought them with them?
Absolutely no way.
So people in general can't go and buy nanothermite if they want to do that?
No. It's not generally available.
It's not accessible.
But the classical, the conventional thermite mixture is, you can buy that on the internet, actually, the old-time thermite.
But that was not what was used.
Well, I have to carry this a little bit further, even though it may be technical, because there are many versions of the thermite reaction. And those most frequently applied for military purposes is called thermate. And this is when you take the classical thermite mixture of aluminum and iron oxide and rust, and you mix into it sulfur and another component called barium nitrate. Then you get a mixture, an incendiary, which is not necessarily hotter, but due to the content of sulfur, it cuts much more easily through steel. It is, the sulfur is acting on the steel, making it easier to cut through it. It lowers the melting point of the steel. And this is what you use for military purposes usually. Mm-hmm. Now, some people, some scientists at Worcester Institute of Technology, his name is Jonathan Barnett. He, I think it was an accident, actually got access to some of the steel beams from the rubble, from ground zero. And what he found, it looks like Swiss cheese. It means that the steel had been corroded in such a way which is unexplainable by ordinary fires. I must say that ordinary fires can never melt steel, never. If you put fire on your desk when you come home, maybe the temperature will reach 650 degrees. It depends very much upon how much air actually get access to the room. Steel melts, iron melts at 538 degrees centigrade, and steel is in the same neighborhood. You know, different steel alloys have different melting points. But this is the range we are in, 1500 degrees centigrade. You can never reach that temperature in an ordinary office fire. There's no way you can do that. But what they found, these...
And not from a plane either?
No. The jet fuel played absolutely zero role in the course of events. This is what most people think. Shall we finish the story of the jet fuel? Many people have seen the impact of the airliners. And you see Flight 11 crashing into the North Tower. And you see a big fireball outside the building. That's where the jet fuel went, 95%. It burned, and the ridiculous thing, everybody can see this big fireball, and that was the jet fuel.
So there wasn't much inside?
5%. It's a small fraction. It doesn't matter. 5%, 10%, I don't care. And jet fuel, I have seen fire experts evaluating the lifetime of the jet fuel which actually went into the building. I've seen estimates between 3 minutes and 8 minutes. So let's take an average and say 5 minutes. So, and then it's gone. But of course they started the fires, the office fire, ordinary office fires. And those were oxygen-starved fires, which you can see from the color of the smoke coming out of the towers. It was coal black, which indicates an oxygen-starving fire, meaning the temperatures were rather low. You could see people standing in the hole where the airplane had gone in. There's a woman standing up there, looking out. It was not particularly hot. There were 2 firefighters who actually came out in the South Tower to the 78th floor, and their radio communication with ground has been recorded. And you can actually hear the museum at ground zero. This is up to 10 seconds before the collapse in the South Tower. And they are saying, they're reporting, there are only isolated pockets of fire up here. We can knock them down with 2 lines.
But
this is what the firefighters say.
All right.
That all they need is 2 hoses and they would be able to extinguish the small fires going on up there. That was the situation in the South Tower.
But at the same time, a lot of people were hanging outside the buildings. You even saw some people removing clothes or something. They were, normally from that height, nobody would go out, jump outside the windows and outside the buildings to hang there. That's absurd, isn't it?
They were stuck. Actually, they were caught between the floors where the airliners had impacted and the roof. And the doors to the roof were locked, and the helicopters were not allowed to land.
And there were too much smoke in there, or what was it? Or heat?
Yeah, of course, they freaked out.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It's terrible.
Another thing is, when the towers collapsed, there was an enormous amount of dust, and it even covered a pretty large area of New York. Is that normal for there to have been that much dust after a building collapses or a controlled demolition? Normal?
Yeah, it's normal for a controlled demolition, but not for say if buildings are collapsing due to earthquakes, as it happens, the picture afterwards is completely different. They tip over.
But even when you've seen
and
a
they
lot
pancake.
Yes.
So, and you do not crush all the concrete. But in this case, all the concrete in the buildings, which was roughly 90,000 tons, that's a bit high, let's say 50,000 tons, it was completely pulverized. And that is normal for controlled demolition and indicates the application of explosives.
But that was really a lot of dust. I mean, I've seen some controlled demolitions also on videos, and I've never seen that much dust.
That's true. There were barely anything left except for the steel skeleton.
Yeah, there seem to have been very little debris and rubbles on the ground. How can that be when the buildings are that enormous, that high? There should be piles and piles of debris down there.
Because everything was blown up. And you see that the responders or the workers in the cleanup process, they reported that they didn't find, the biggest thing they found was the control of a cell phone.
So it can really turn into dust?
It's pulverized.
Pulverized.
Let's put it this way.
Mm-hmm.
Dust is not the proper term, actually. You should call it powder, but most people call it dust.
All right.
But basically, of course, there was bigger lumps. I mean, but qualitatively, we should stress this. Mm-hmm. Qualitatively, you must say that everything was pulverized except for the steel frame.
In that pulverized dust, you have claimed, you have found, or people that you work with have found these red-gray chips. Yeah. What are the red-gray chips, just briefly to understand what that's been all about? Because that's been a significant thing in your lectures, right?
No, actually not.
No?
No.
Okay.
I talk, in my general lecture, I talk for more than 2 hours, and maybe I spent 10 minutes on the nanothermite, because I still consider it an academic footnote.
So how important is those red-gray chips for people to understand?
They are only one among more than among hundreds of other observations which violates the official story. I should consider it as such. But there's been much misunderstanding how far you can actually carry the conclusions. So what I have to say, the main conclusion is that the material we have found is thermitic, meaning that it is still reactive and you form elemental iron in the process. This is the criterion for calling a material thermitic. And we didn't finish the other story with the steel beams. I told you about thermite, I told you about sulfur, I told you about Jonathan Barnett from the Worcester Institute of Technology, and he was investigating the steel beams. Now he found, what you call it, a metallurg, what you call a person who is studying metals. He found what is called sulfurized steel, meaning that he found traces of sulfur within the steel iron structure, which indicate unambiguously the thermate has been applied when cutting the steel. Now the nanothermite cannot account for this. We do not find sulfur, meaning that to take down the towers in Building 7, there has been applied explosives. We don't know the nature of the explosives, their composition.
Nobody knows. Nobody has any guess about that.
NIST has been asked repeatedly, have you looked for explosives in the rubble? And NIST answered, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they say, no, we haven't looked for it because there's no reason to look for something which isn't there.
And can you prove that it's in fact is thermitic material?
Yeah, it reacts. You heat it up and it goes off and you form elemental iron, and that's basically it.
So these red-gray chips you talk about is something you can see through a microscope that comes from the dust from the thermitic material. Is that how it is?
Yeah, it's traces of thermitic material found in the dust. And the best thing you can say about them is they shouldn't be there. Of course, I have personal hypotheses about where it fits into the scenario you're actually seeing. But it's not timely to speculate in hypothetical blast scenarios. You shouldn't do that. Many people do that. And you asked me to explain explicitly how nanothermite was used in the demolition of World Trade Center. And fact is, I cannot. We don't know where it fits in. We can guess, but we should refrain from doing that and still being serious.
But what you're concluding is that it does not come from the planes,
Definitely
and it comes from explosives that must have been...
Nope.
No.
We don't know.
You don't know.
Probably my own feeling is actually that it's more of an incendiary. And the wonderful thing with these materials is that they're very versatile in applications. You can actually paint them on, roll them on, spray them on there, and they're very safe to handle. And now we are going into area of speculation, and all we can do is to point out that there was extensive renovation going on in the elevator shafts since March on that year. There was a year-long program ongoing about renewing of the fireproofing of the whole steel structure, etc., etc. Regarding access to the towers, which is a question which comes up very frequently.
But isn't it okay sometimes? You have to kind of speculate, or at least offer your opinion, when a lot of truth or a lot of facts is not presented to the world. Isn't that how you kind of get your message across?
That is correct, and it is also correct. But we should appreciate that there is no truth in science. There's only the best hypothesis of the day. Mm-hmm. So you have a series of observation, and the best model is the truth of the day. And you should be ready to take other observations in and eventually correct your hypothesis. Right. And that should apply to the official version in particular. Mm-hmm. Because NIST claims that Building 7 collapsed due to fire. That is a hypothesis. But it is so shamelessly supported in their report, so I will not refrain from characterizing their report as scientific fraud. It's so flawed, and they're using all academic tricks to cheat. So I'm quite decisive on that point. Regarding the towers, this may surprise you. There is no official technical account for the collapses of the towers.
Not even in the NIST report?
The NIST report is 14,000 pages, including what we call supplementary material and tables and stuff like that. But their timeline stops before the towers collapse. They spent 14,000 pages on describing the situation prior to collapse. And now then they bring it to a point and it's filled with omissions, errors, deliberate falsifications, and elaborate language to cover up. They bring it to a point and claim that now it's obvious that the towers are bound to collapse. And then they go home. They cut, they leave. There is no physical account of the collapses. They leave it out
of the report.
There is no report. You wouldn't believe this. The funny thing is that chapter 6 of the NIST report on the towers is called the probable collapse sequence.
It's quite a large book, even made into a book, huh?
Yeah, and it's several books actually, and supplementary materials and all the tables and documentation. What you do is you read the main summary. Mm-hmm. It's a whole series of reports. It's a pile high, 14,000 pages. Wow, but they don't cover the collapse, man.
Wow,
That's
well,
ridiculous.
You are now calling for a new independent investigation into what actually took place. Yeah. But I mean, a very important question would be, why are you calling for a new independent investigation? Wouldn't that just be like, it would be the same people who would do the investigation and do a new report, a new commission would be put in place, and they would just come up with what do you think you will gain, a new better result for the world?
I'm opposed to crime. And I want to live in a society governed by the rule of law. And one of the basic principles of our society regarding the law of the land is that a man is innocent until the opposite is, until proven guilty. And regarding 9/11, we have to ask for any evidence which is supporting the claim that the United States was attacked by Muslims on that day.
But you do not accept the NIST report, and you don't accept other things written and reported about what actually took place. You want a new investigation, but who would conduct it? Wouldn't it be the same people who did the other reports?
That depends. Of course, what you're saying now is there's really no way, so you should rather give up.
Probably it would be a good thing to do in order to get some media attention about having it done.
Absolutely. The key factor here is the media, definitely. And of course the problem is that the American Congress, as many people has made very clear to me, will never do this. And also the problem is that also the media people, when they have reported the official story and they know it's wrong, they're actually complicit in the cover-up. So everybody, more or less, within the media, consciously or unconsciously, have become complicit in this mass cover-up, which correctly, you point out, makes it difficult to come through. That's why it's wonderful that we have alternative media like this one.
But do you also think that we are kind of in the age of truth a little bit, and more things, more stuff is coming out?
Yeah.
Do you think that more news will break about this, what happened on 9/11?
It is breaking gradually, definitely. And I told you earlier in this interview that bringing the subject up at the lunch table was a very bad idea. But that situation has softened up also on a very personal basis around previously you could break up any party by either talking about politics, religion, or 9/11. You know that. You could, whenever you're having a good time, you could always ruin it by bringing up one of these problems.
Have you tried that a few times, or?
Yes, but we know, it has personal consequences actually speaking out.
What kind of personal consequences have you had in your private life, or maybe in your professional? Now you're retired, but
definitely.
What have you experienced in your personal life? Because you've been brave to really do your own thing. Whether people believe it or not, you have done your own thing. You've gone on your own steel firm crusade. You've been speaking out and giving lectures all over the world.
Yeah, it has consequences. You're losing your friends. You're becoming an alien within the society. And for several reasons.
Do you think that the term conspiracy theorist has been ridiculed so much that everybody can just say, "Oh, it's a conspiracy theorist," and
exactly,
then you laugh?
And then you're more or less washed away as a crackpot. But the funny thing here is that the official story is a conspiracy theory. I mean, a conspiracy means that more than two people are actually arranging for making a crime. And according to the official story, Osama bin Laden conspired with the 19 hijackers to carry out the hijackings. So it's a conspiracy. And the obvious thing is that there is actually no evidence for this story to be correct.
Why do you think it's unrealistic that Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda was behind these attacks?
That is not the point. It is violate basic natural scientific laws, and I'm talking about Sir Isaac Newton's laws here and Galileo Galilei. It is physically impossible for them to have carried out the attacks according to the official story. It's not a matter whether it is probable or if Osama bin Laden had any motives for doing this. He simply didn't do it. There's no evidence. A
lot of people in the world would have a difficult time agreeing with you on that.
Bring forward the evidence. When I'm in discussions like this, I have two questions. And you could play the role of my opponent in a discussion at television. So I ask you the question. Do you believe that America was attacked by 19 Muslims on September 11, 2001? And you should answer yes. My next question would then be why? And then we just wait.
The official story is that it's like a Muslim war against the United States. It's terrorism, it's religious, political.
What is the evidence? The hard evidence. I hear nothing, and you're playing your role very well, because there is no evidence for the official account to be correct.
Who do you think Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda was, in your opinion?
I don't. For one thing, he died 11 years ago. You know, he died probably the 12th or the 13th of December 2001.
What evidence do we have to support that?
He was the story of Osama bin Laden. He came to the American hospital in Dubai on July 4th, 2001, from Pakistan with a plane, together with his doctor, Al-Zawahiri, an Algerian nurse, and his bodyguards. He came to the hospital because he suffered from a very serious infection of his kidneys. So he was treated on the urological department by the principal physician there. His name was Terry Galloway, the name of the doctor.
The physician, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
And he stayed there for 10 days. He left again on the 14th. During his stay, he was visited among...
And that was even reported in the papers, right? In a French newspaper.
Le Figaro,
yes.
One example. And he was visited, among others, by the leading members of the Saudi Arabian intelligence, and also by Larry Mitchell, who was the head of the local CIA office, on July the 10th. And after Osama bin Laden left the hospital on the 14th, Larry Mitchell returned to the United States on the 15th. Upon departure, he ordered delivery of a mobile dialysis unit to be delivered in Kandahar. So he was on dialysis for the rest of his life. To do that is no joke. I don't know if you know any dialysis patients, but you need clean water, access to clean water, what you call aseptic surroundings, sterile surroundings. You need trained personnel for doing the dialysis. And you also need a laboratory, because you have to monitor the dialysis during the process.
So that would be impossible to have that in a cave in Afghanistan.
You do not get very far on the back of a mule under those circumstances. And for instance, Osama bin Laden came to the Pakistani headquarters own hospital in Rawalpindi on Monday, September the 10th, in the evening. And they cleared the whole urological department for patients and personnel for this single individual to have his dialysis. So he was in Pakistan on the 10th. Question was if he could go back to Afghanistan on the 11th to conduct the attack on the United States, because according to NATO, and they met on September the 12th in Brussels and activated Article 5 within the NATO treaty, according to which they considered it an attack on the United States, provided the attack was directed from abroad. On the 12th, within 24 hours, they met in Brussels, and with this declaration. Question is if Osama bin Laden was ever in Afghanistan on the 11th. He was in Pakistan on the evening of the 10th.
Well, they at least say that he was in Pakistan on the 1st of May in 2011, where they shot him in a compound by Navy SEALs.
They didn't. Why do you believe that?
I would like to ask you if you believe it.
We have seen no evidence for this to be true. But during September, on 4 occasions, he actually came out with opinions on 9/11. Most explicitly in an interview given to the Pakistani paper called Umat on the 28th of September. It was translated by the BBC International Service on the 29th, and you can read it, it's on the web. And he quite explicitly tells us that he has nothing to do with these attacks. I think, and then the last
And
time,
do you think he would be proud of it if he had, and then he would have said, yes, of course, that was his agenda?
No, but the last thing we see him, and it is him. This interview was probably recorded on November the 8th or the 9th.
In 2001?
2001. And on that occasion, he does not say anything about whether he was related to the attacks or not. He claims that the attack was a consequence of God's will. And personally, I think he was not very clever. He might have believed that somebody actually did this. And at that time, you must remember, if you do, that all the boys in Jalalabad was running around with T-shirts with big pictures of Osama bin Laden on the front. So the tragedy is that many Muslims, he became a hero at that time. That I will not exclude the option that he actually believed that somebody else had done it.
But what about the footage we've seen of him in later years, after 2001?
They're so obviously fakes. I mean, just take a look. For instance, the one which came out 4 days before the election, 2004. Now, he's apparently 30 years younger than he was in 2001. And let me also add that this interview, which we believe was recorded on the 8th or the 9th of September, when it came out, it wasn't released before December 29th. When it came out, then CNN has a physician, a doctor in the studio. His name was Hanji Gupta. And to evaluate the health state of Osama bin Laden and said, this is a typical dialysis patient. He was immobilized in his left. That time he was characterized as a typical kidney patient. There is a witness from his funeral on December the 14th. It should be said that this is a leading Taliban, so you take it or leave it, take it for what it is. And on these parts of the world, they have a tradition of getting people into the ground very quickly following death. So it's reasonable to assume that he died on the 13th or the 12th. And we haven't seen any reliable sign of him since. Everything which has come up, all the videos and all the audio tapes are so obvious fakes. There's been written books about it, which I will recommend. David Ray Griffin. And he has gone meticulously through all this material, and it doesn't hold up.
So if you say that Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda was not behind the World Trade Center attacks, who was?
This we don't know. I will not hypothesize on this. I'm calling for an independent investigation. And if you ask who should carry out this investigation, it must be based on public demand, and this is what we're doing right now. We are encouraging everyone watching this to trust themselves and nobody else.
But don't you think it's your duty with that platform you have now, both in the media and also in your lectures, and that you go out independently a lot to talk about this? Yeah. Why isn't it your duty a little bit to offer a solution to talk about, because in your investigations you must have come across so many facts and so many things that leads up to something. Isn't there a conclusion? Isn't that part of what you must offer to people?
No.
Who's behind it? If it's not Osama bin Laden, who is it?
Well, I don't know, but it is my duty as a scientist to offer my competence within within science to point out that the official version violates basic scientific principles. Completely basic. There's no way that the collapse of the World Trade Center could have happened. I think it's completely wrong to talk about countries and governments here. But
do you think it's all interconnected?
No, I think, well, this is very personal. I think every time, if you try to rationalize the conflict along vertical frontiers, if you talk about countries, or if you talk about religious or ethnic groupings, you are derailing the discussion, really. Because I think the real conflict in the world now, this has nothing to do with science, is not between ethnic or religious groups, but it's between top and bottom. But they are, of course, they're doing what they can to have the religious and the national and the ethnic groups fight with each other.
But you also stated, even in this interview, that the media is not telling the truth. So somebody within the power structure of the media and the politicians must know more about the facts here.
Definitely. Or everybody knows that you shouldn't talk about this. Every editor of a major newspaper knows that this is a no story.
Mm-hmm. But right now we are in 2013. What consequences has 9/11 had on the world today? It's been 12 years. What has happened in these years?
Disasters. It really doesn't matter if you talk about the economy, which is going already over the fiscal cliff.
The financial crisis?
Yeah, definitely.
Is that also because of that?
It doesn't matter what you talk about. Words are getting a big now. What I will say is that our Western civilization is doomed unless we face the unanswered questions of 9/11. It doesn't matter if you're involved with the economy, with the financial crisis, the environment, civil rights, which has been really violated all these years.
In what way, civil rights?
I mean, you can make a whole list of how the American Constitution has been violated. I mean, the habeas corpus, you have people sitting in Guantanamo now for 12 years without any proofs. And the very thing about Osama bin Laden, and this is really not I cannot mention all these things off my head. But the civil rights has been violated due to the Patriot Act, which was passed from Friday to Monday, and it is 800 pages. I mean, the representatives of the American Congress had actually no chance of reading it, but they were forced into doing it because Tom Daschle had anthrax spores sent to his office, so everybody was scared. And so everybody signed very quickly the Patriot Act. And here in Denmark, everywhere in the Western society, we've had the so-called terror laws, according to which actually the intelligence agencies had the right to read all your mails. And for instance...
Surveillance, you mean?
Total surveillance. So everything you write and talk on your telephone, everything is being monitored. And last year, on New Year's Eve, 2011, the American president signed a National Defense Authorization Act, according to which the American Army is instructed, it comes, I think it's section 1122, the American Army is authorized to arrest everyone on the planet if they have any suspicion of terrorists' relationship, and withhold them indefinitely without any proof, without ever having seen a judge, without anything. Meaning that if they think tomorrow that you are too much of a problem, you just disappeared, and it's completely legal according to this executive order from the American president. That's it.
And after 9/11 happened, the government under George W. Bush initiated the war on terror and went to war first in Iraq and said that they had weapons of mass destruction, which of course we now know was a false thing to say, not true. And then we went to war in Afghanistan. Also here in Denmark, they are part of the war. How do you? That was two massive, huge, world-changing events that happened there as well.
Actually, we went to war in Afghanistan first. Remember? And that is a story on its own, if I can tell it from the Danish perspective. Because, as I told you previously in this interview, the NATO, the North Atlantic Assembly in Brussels on September the 12th met and decided to activate Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which is the famous Musketeer Oath, which implies that an attack on any one of the members automatically implies an attack of the whole alliance. This is Article 5 of the NATO Treaty. And they activated it, as I said, provided the attack was directed from abroad, meaning they had a suspect, but they were still missing the evidence, which is the key word in this whole interview. Where is the evidence? So, this evidence was formally presented to the North Atlantic Assembly on October the 2nd by an American diplomat by the title of ambassador. His name was Frank Taylor. And he presented to the Assembly the evidence that the attack was directed from abroad on October the 2nd. And NATO sent out what you call a declaration, a message, that they had seen this evidence and there would be briefings in the national capitals. This apparently happened in Copenhagen on October the 3rd. There was a meeting in what you would call the Foreign Affairs Committee here in Copenhagen on the 3rd. And probably this was going on as well in the other national headquarters. And on the 4th, there was again a meeting in NATO, and Lord Robertson, who was Secretary General at the time, was meeting the press and said that now we have seen the evidence, and we accept it, and now we consider Article 5 of the NATO Treaty to be formally activated. And they institutionalized Article 5 by taking, I think, a list of 10 different measures. And one of them, number 8, I think, was that the lands was committed to open their airspace for flights, provided they were related to the war on terror. And you may be aware that there's been a lot of fuss in Denmark because of the CIA, what is it called? This program where CIA has been taking prisoners around the world on CIA flights, and they were landing on Greenland 102 times. So there's been a lot of fuss whether these flights were actually legal or not. But according to my account of events, Denmark was actually committed to allow these flights already from October the 4th, 2001.
Really?
Frank Taylor, you may notice that what I'm talking about here is the only occasion where the evidence we have been asking for all the time, where the evidence for the guilt, complicity of Al-Qaeda has been presented. This is the only case where this evidence has been presented by Frank Taylor on October the 2nd. Now,
what year? Say it again, what year?
2001. October 2nd, 2001. Now, Frank Taylor's report is classified for 30 years. And the Danes have been to war for 11 years. And we went actually...
It was only a little over a month then after the 9/11 attacks happened.
No, it was more than a month actually, because the Operation Enduring Freedom, which was the hunt of Osama bin Laden, Of course, the Americans started their own Enduring Freedom, but Denmark joined this operation around Christmas time, 2001, and supplied 102 soldiers to this Operation Enduring Freedom. And they were operating under the name of Task Group Harrit. This was the name of the Danish, what you call it, division, part of this. So we was participating in the hunt down of Osama bin Laden at a time where he apparently was already dead. And 43 Danish women and men has died in the Afghan war. But the Danes still have never seen the evidence. Formally, we do not know why we are at war. In principles, some of our politicians have seen it. At this meeting in Copenhagen on October the 3rd. But they have, what you say when you're not allowed to talk about it afterwards? What is the name?
Classified?
Yeah, you're not, they have...
Top secret.
Yeah, they're not allowed to talk about it. So, and his report is classified for 30 years, Frank Taylor's report. But that is the only case where the evidence has actually been presented formally. That's the story of how Denmark got to war, and we haven't got out yet.
Interesting.
And this is the first attacking war since 1848 from Denmark. We have never attacked the country.
It's important knowledge.
Yeah.
So now we've been speaking about what happened to the Twin Towers and Building 7, but also something very important that took place on 9/11 was the Pentagon hit by a plane. And that's a very, very interesting thing, because that's in a very protected area in Washington of all places. So what are your thoughts on what happened at the Pentagon?
Well, first of all, not only Pentagon, but the northeastern country part of the United States is probably the most surveyed and controlled airspace in the world. And what we experienced on that day was that apparently these 4 hijacked, so alert hijacked airliners were free to fly around in this airspace for 1.5 hours without the American Air Force intercepting. And this is a general procedure, standard procedure, that whenever an airliner is either not responding from the control tower, or is going out of its course, or if there's any problem, within 10 minutes there are 2 fighters in his tail and looking and say, hey, what's happening, and can please line up.
From NORAD, the American Military Air Force.
From the Air Force. And this didn't happen on this day. For 1.5 hours, these airliners were allowed to fly around. And particularly the one which they claim hit the Pentagon, Flight 77, was flown by, according to the official story, a pilot called Hanji Hanjua, who we know was not only a bad pilot, but he was barely a pilot at all. He couldn't, 1.5 months prior, before 9/11, he tried to rent a Cessna.
Which is a smaller little propeller plane or something?
One-engine propeller plane in an airfield. And they simply wouldn't let him have it because he couldn't control it. 3 times there was an instructor up in the air with Hanji Hanjua, and he simply couldn't control the plane, so they said, there's no way you can rent it. And this is documented, no way around. But according to the official story, Hanji Hanjua was sitting in a Boeing 757. He has never been in a cockpit like that before, and performing a maneuver which is making experienced pilots simply lose their breath and drop their jaw. He came from, I don't know, he's making a 330 degrees turn and diving at the same time from, I should be careful, 2 kilometers. I don't know how many 1,000 feet. And he's diving at the same time. And it's a right-hand dive. And a ridiculous detail is that the chief pilot in such a plane is sitting on the left side. There's no way he can see where he's going. He's making a right-hand dive and is going there, and then he's flying 5 feet over the ground for the last, 300-400 meters, and then hitting the Pentagon. You see the most experienced pilots seeing this and said, I have had 6,000 hours in Boeing 757. If you gave me 50 attempts, I maybe succeed in one of them for doing this maneuver. It's close to impossible. It's extremely challenging.
And nothing really happened to the lawn outside of the Pentagon, did it? Or was?
Etc., etc. The hole in the wall is far too small. I think it's 6 meters across.
They also said that the hole in the wall actually collapsed like 20 minutes after impact.
The whole thing collapsed 20 minutes after, so you couldn't see any. But so what counts here is the very early pictures taken of the impact point. And there is no way a Boeing 57 could have disappeared within the building.
And there's very little footage of the impact from the surveillance cameras,
There's none actually. And somebody says there were more than 80 surveillance cameras. Again, this building, and it was defended by a missile system, which apparently was turned off on that day. And minutes after the impact, you had an FBI agent standing at the gas station and the hotel receptions and in the different shops in the neighborhood, asking for their tape from the surveillance camera, confiscating it, like that.
So what do you think hit Pentagon?
Well, let me finish, because one thing is that the entrance hole is too small. Another thing is there is no wreckage. When you have a flight crash, you can always reconstruct the wreckage. And they have done it on occasions, most ridiculous. They have picked up airliners from the bottom of lakes and put the wreckage together again. There are, I think, literally thousands of spare parts in a modern airliner with serial numbers. And you know which spare parts with which serial numbers are sitting in every plane on the planet. There's a log on all this, very meticulously. So, and we haven't been presented of any of these spares. We haven't seen the wreckage. The third observation, which also completely violates the thought of the Boeing 757, is in the C ring. You know, Pentagon was made up of rings. The outer ring is the E ring, and there are 2 walls, and then there's a gap between the next ring, the D ring, there are 2 walls, and then comes the C ring, there are 2 walls. In the inner part of the C ring, in line actually with the impact of the airliner, there is a hole which is about 3 meters in diameter, which, you know, the nose of an airliner is soft like, it's very soft, because that's where you have the radar. There's no way the nose could have gone all the way through that.
So what do you think it was?
But this is speculation, as long as there's no evidence presented at all. So, and the truth movement in general is divided on this issue. Basically because this subject has been spammed a lot with misinformation. But I believe it was a missile.
A missile?
Yeah, I believe that.
So what happened to the
and
American flight, the
77?
It disappeared, or?
If there was a flight 77, it was scheduled to fly on Monday.
Mm-hmm. So what about the planes that actually hit the World Trade Center? Do you think that it was American Airlines flights, or was it, as some people have said, possibly these drones that are now, these military computer-controlled planes with no pilots?
No, what hit World Trade Center, I mean, imagine there was 1 million standing on the floor actually seeing the planes. There's no doubt that it was airliners, at least very.
But there are no pictures of American Airlines sign on the planes. We haven't seen that, have we?
That's true, and particularly the one impacting the footage on the North Tower. There's only one recording of that, but in the South Tower, definitely there. At that time already, all the major networks already had their cameras.
So do you think there were people inside, like they say?
I'm not guessing on this. We don't know. There are people theorizing about that the planes had been swapped, and so another planes have taken over. All this is speculation.
Some theories are that the military has had these computer-steered planes with no pilots for at least 50 years.
Well, that's another thing.
Military secret, so.
That's another thing. There's no way with the Boeing. These are 767s, a huge, not jumbo jets, but they're very, very big. Boeing 767. There's no way, and they are flying at cruising speed, 950 kilometers per hour. There's no way you can actually hit the World Trade Center under those circumstances, flying manually. And particularly if you haven't sitting in a cockpit like that before, it gets even more crazy. There's a small little story about on the day there was a flight school where they were training pilots to fly Boeing 737s, which are 30% less than the 757. I don't know how much smaller it is than the 767, but they are much smaller than the Boeing 767. They were training pilots in 737s. And of course, in the morning, there were instructors. They had 2 simulators. And in the morning, after the third impact, of course, they closed down everything and everybody was sitting there watching television. Around noon, they took a look at each other and said, hey, why don't we try? Well, let's try it. Let's go down and try it. So they rigged up the simulators for New York City, the coordinates and everything. And then they were trying to, still it's a 737, trying to hit the towers. They couldn't. So they slowed down the speed of the airliner. Still they couldn't. And they slowed down the speed. Still they couldn't. Finally, they were down at landing speed. You know, all the flaps out. And then the instructor, the leader of the school, he managed to, hitting the tower. These are the circumstances. And at the same time, according to the official story, when upon hitting the North Tower, we have been told that one of the pilots, you know, they found his passport besides the tower. So imagine that they're sitting there committing suicide, devoted Muslims, 950 kilometers per hour, and a few seconds before impact, the chief pilot said, hey, can you hold the wheel for a second? I have to pull out my passport. And he's pulling out the passport and rolling down the window and throwing it out and committing suicide. This is what we're told.
Well, you can't even roll down the window, can you?
Or alternatively, that this passport should have survived the fireball, which according to the official story should have melted 90,000 tons of steel. So
it could actually have been like a computer-steered plane, a drone.
At some point...
But do you think that the military has these highly developed technology that actually the general public doesn't know anything about?
Well, the general public, no. This is known. Of course you can.
I mean, HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project in Alaska, is one example of a very developed technology, high power frequency transmitter who's supposedly able to alterate the weather and create natural disasters and create beams for mind control.
I think you're going vastly off track now, aren't you?
No.
This has nothing to do with directed airlines.
It leads up to my next question. Okay. Because in Dr. Judy Wood's book, Where Did the Towers Go?, she states that the Twin Towers dematerialized and turned into dust, which you also say, and vanished in mid-air. But she also claims that a very highly developed technology was probably used in order frequencies or beams were used, like what could have been, let's say, what they say HAARP or something else is. What are your observations about what Judy Wood is saying in her book?
Well, I think we should wait until Judy Wood tells us what she's talking about. Nobody knows what she's talking about, so I can't answer.
She has an alternative point of view also to what happened on 9/11.
No, she doesn't.
You don't think so?
No. But we have to wait until she tells us explains what she's talking about.
Why do you think do you think it differs very much from your theories?
But there is nothing to relate to because she hasn't told us what she's talking about. You can't refer to it. You can't refer it.
Would you like to have a discussion with her one day in a debate?
No.
No?
No.
Why not? Why?
Because I will not lend credibility to stuff like that unless she specifies what she's talking about.
Sometimes I have noticed that within the truth movement and let's say conspiracy researchers, there's a lot of competition, a lot of people who are kind of in one, there's one in that group and one belonging to that group, and it seems a little bit, it distorts the picture a little bit that people who are actually talking about the same thing.
That's not true. That's simply not true.
So are you open and are you open to all kinds of researchers who's talking about things that go against the official version?
Of course.
Like, for example, Judy Wood.
No, it has to be real. I'm operating within accepted science, and Judy Wood is talking about things disappearing. Do you think this object can disappear?
I don't know if they had a technology that we cannot comprehend. How would I know?
Okay.
I personally wouldn't know, just as I wouldn't know how the towers could come down in that way that you have explained.
Judy Wood it's totally rubbish and nonsense.
But if it's technology that you don't know about, that I don't know about, that the world does not know about because it's secret, it's classified, it's military top secret.
So nobody knows about it. Judy Wood doesn't know about it. You don't know about it. I don't know about it. Nobody knows about it.
What are your thoughts on a Russian 9/11 researcher called Dmitry Khalisov, who has theories on nuclear detonators under the ground, talking about a nuclear demolition that might have taken place, that might have caused the towers to collapse? Do you have any thoughts on his theories on this?
What is the evidence?
You do not. You don't support his theories.
What is the evidence? If you tell me the evidence, I will relate to that.
Tell me now about Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And the website is ae911truth.org.
This is Richard Gage, who's running this organization. And there are more than 770-something architects, certified architects and engineers, who have signed to this petition requiring an independent investigation of the collapses of World Trade Center. That I'm a supporting member.
You're supporting.
There are more than 10,000 supporting members.
Do you consider that the reports done by Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth is a conclusive proof of the demolition questions concerning the destruction of the towers?
Absolutely, over and over again. And there's a very nice, I would suggest that everybody here goes to a film called The Experts Speak Out. The long version is 2 hours. There's a shorter version around 1 hour, where more than 43 experts, and we're talking about architects, engineers, chemists, physics, demolition experts, explosive experts, all kind of people, are in unison explaining why World Trade Center was a controlled demolition.
And Stephen E. Jones was one of the people that initiated this scientific investigation that's going on within this.
Several people. Richard Gage, he was actually alerted by a broadcast he heard about David Ray Griffin, who is a retired professor of theology. But Jones became conscious late 2005 about this. And it's true that my attention to the subject was also brought along by Stephen E. Jones. Yeah. A lecture he gave at his university, Brigham Young University, in 2006.
Was there any researchers or scientists or anything, or anyone before you and your colleagues that actually went out and talked about this and voiced a public opinion about this before you came along?
Yeah, but I'm by any means I'm not unique. There are thousands of people like me all over the world. It's just accidental that we are sitting in a fairly small country. Mm-hmm. There are thousands. And if you broaden it up and say how many people are questioning the official version of 9/11, we're talking about millions. Everybody knows that everybody knows that everybody knows that everybody knows, but we just don't talk about it.
Why do you think they care so much about what you say? Why are your statements so important?
How could I possibly answer a question on behalf of other people?
But isn't it eye-opening that somebody would go out and do what they can to debunk you, to speak against you?
But there are many of these kind of people, and there are many reasons. They may have many reasons for doing that, but I cannot answer on behalf of other people. So what are the evidence for them to support? Why do they support the official story? Have you asked them? You should take them in and ask them that simple story. That's it.
In just 5 days, on the 25th of February, a historic court case is going to take place in England, and you're going to take part in it, and where the BBC, and I quote, "The BBC is challenged over the inaccurate and biased manner in which it has portrayed the events and evidence of 9/11 in a BBC documentary from September 2011 called The Conspiracy Files 9/11 10 Years On." And you will be one of the people talking and presenting your case for 3 hours. What exactly is this trial all about? Why is that happening now? And what result do you think you will get from this?
Well, it's wonderful because, in England, they have the same system in Denmark, is that you're paying a TV license. And you're not allowed to deny to pay the TV license. It's the same thing in Denmark. And then there is this guy, Tony Root, who has refused to pay his TV license because there also in England is legislation, terror legislation, according to which you are not allowed to support any organization who may be related to Al-Qaeda or who may support terrorist organizations. And since BBC has promoted the official story, they have prevented an independent investigation of 9/11. That is, they have supported the real terrorists if the story is false, if the official story is false. So that's where it stands. So we have 3 hours actually to demonstrate the original version is false, which is very easy, for me at least, as a scientist, because the impact, as we have been through, of the airliners, the collapse of World Trade Center was not due to the airliners. It's in violation of Newton's laws.
So what are your hopes for this trial?
That actually that he will win the trial, which meaning that actually all the Brits don't have to pay their TV license from now on. It's gonna be fun.
Do you think it will be reported in the mainstream media because the BBC is involved?
ITV has announced their appearance, which, as I understand, is a major cable network over there. Maybe Russia Today, which is, we don't know. It's still a few days to come. So I don't know really actually what.
Would you consider writing a book about your investigation and your theories?
No, I don't have time for that. Other people are writing brilliant books. And particularly, I must suggest David Ray Griffin's books. They're very accurate. The other people are writing very good books. I'm good at giving presentations, and this is what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. I read somewhere that you also wanted to take news media to court because they had said that you were, what was it, crazy or something for stating your theories?
I have a court case running actually for a Danish newspaper.
Yeah.
Who is putting me in league with Holocaust deniers and creationists and calling me a crackpot. So they have to prove actually that I am a crackpot, and this is an ongoing case.
They actually said, quote, that you were a crackpot?
Yeah, they wrote that.
What newspaper was this?
Weekendavisen is the name of the newspaper.
But that's kind of an independent paper in Denmark, isn't it, a little bit?
Are there any independent papers in Denmark? But then Danish radio, I can inform you, maybe this is news for you, they have admitted they do not have any evidence for the official story about 9/11 to be correct. Danish radio, the national Danish radio. But to get through with anything about that is, everybody is stonewalling. All the options you have to complain, they're stonewalling. But we are moving gradually through the system there. It may end up in court as well, because that means that we are not committed. We don't have to pay our TV license either, because the National Danish Radio are not fulfilling their public service contract with the Danish state, according to which they should do their best to provide the truth, the evidence. And they have admitted they are not doing that. The Danish radio have admitted that they do not have any evidence. But they say, but you can't blame us for repeating official statements. That's what they say. We're just repeating official statements, or official, what would be the proper English word here? I don't know. Theories, the official version of events. Official version. You cannot blame us for communicating them.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying they are repeaters, not reporters.
That's a good point. Sounds very good in English. Yeah, I've not thought about that one. That's a good one.
Yeah, I heard it from David Icke.
Good. Good.
I thought that was kind of funny.
I'll take that along.
Speaking of funny, in your lectures you actually use a lot of humor when you speak, so it doesn't become like dry science, which is of course. And how important is it for you to actually present it that way and not be so serious all the time, even though it's a very serious topic?
I've been teaching for 45 years, and it is very much a matter of being where you are. Okay? Maybe that's what it's all about, instead of being other places. So yes, I'm aware of that, and we should notice that humor goes a long way. Think of Charlie Chaplin and his movies. The Swedish movie maker Roy Andersson is getting a long way. So yes, Marx Brothers, you can say a lot of things. You get further with a smile and a joke.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So are there some important things that you think is very significant to get across now that we're talking about this, that we haven't spoken about when covering the whole 9/11 issue and what has happened afterwards, and what is in fact...
Maybe the Western society is at a crossroad now. It's very, very critical times we are in now. We are on the verge of the Third World War, and it's going to be nasty. Actually, I believe it's going to be nasty no matter what happens due to the economy. But
do you think a Third World War might happen?
I think it's rolling. We are sliding gradually into it. I think it started on September 11th, 2001. But
how can we prevent that?
Exactly by telling the truth. This is our only and most efficient weapon.
But then again, people will ask, I can ask it, you can ask it, what is the truth? Because there are a lot of disinformation and deception, yes. And even within the truth movement, there's a lot of different ways of approaching this kind of truth. What is the truth? How do we really search for it? How do we find it?
By primarily trusting yourself. Trust what you see. And to see what you see is actually a bigger thing than it sounds like, because most people see what they're expected to see. For instance, if you see World Trade Center Twin Towers collapsing, people are seeing only gravity working. But if you dare to see what is actually going on, you'll see the building being blown up. And that's it. 9/11 was not a consequence of the America. Osama bin Laden was not behind 9/11. And I think that 9/11 is the key in the sense of realizing what we have been told of lies. And it is absolutely necessary to confront the unanswered questions of 9/11 for our civilization to cope without that point.
But isn't
The lies kills us. The truth hurts. And that is the obstacle we're up against.
But a lot of people fear speaking the truth and speaking, against what is the official story.
Yeah.
Also because they have a problem supporting it, and people have a kind of a low, short attention span.
Yeah, but the main problem is that it hurts, that nobody wants to know that you have been fooled, in particular not by the people who supposedly should take care of us, our leaders, that we have been fooled and cheated on by our leaders. Nobody wants to hear it. It hurts. It's painful to realize this. But the truth hurts, yes, but the lies are killing us.
So do you think people should remove themselves from fear, put fear away a bit more, or because they're very controlled by fear of what other people think and what if they go against the stream, that, it has terrible consequences for them?
Yeah, you have to find your spine and actually...
How did you find the courage inside yourself to go out on this mission on your own, which it actually is in a way?
I'm just one among us, I told you, million of people around the world. And that's the beauty of the truth movement, that everybody is acting out of an inner urge. Nobody's telling anybody to do anything. Everyone, every single individual, this huge movement is acting from an inner urge, an inner voice telling them I must do something. And everybody's acting from the point in time and space they are. So if it's two kids in Cardiff, what can I do? Well, I go down in mainstream, I'm passing out flyers and DVDs. Wonderful. And all people are setting up web pages, they're arranging movies and stuff like that. You do not go out and look for 9/11. 9/11 finds you. And accidentally, 9/11 found me as a scientist, now retired, at the University of Copenhagen. So I had to do what I had to do. And that was bringing my competence and my understanding out to a wider audience. The government here, the state paid my education years back, and they've paid my salary for so many years. Now it's payback time.
So would you consider at some point taking it a little bit further and talking about an even larger global scheme or whatever, like?
No.
You would not do that?
No, this is not my duty. It is my duty as a scientist to point out that World Trade Center did not collapse. The 3 high-rises, the 3 skyscrapers of World Trade Center did not collapse due to the 2 airliners. You may have had a difficult time with your physics teacher. Okay, but everybody can count to 3. There were 2 airliners, but there were 3 skyscrapers. Please think for yourself.
It's been highly enlightening and informative and very, very interesting. Mind-blowing, I'm sure, to a lot of people.
Okay.
And I want to thank you very much, Professor Niels Harrit, for taking your time to talk to Age of Truth TV. Thank you very much, and good luck with your further investigation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Age of Truth.